There once was a human entity. It could be either a man or woman, but for the sake of simplicity, we are going to call this entity a him. His name is She-Man. In a location in the middle of the desert, the clouds are dark and a flash of lightning sears the earth plane. The lightning bolt had a mission, and it was to deposit one human entity right in the middle of this barren land. She-Man materialized in the spot where the bolt struck. He looked around and had no remembrance of how or why he was there. He had no memory of past or future. It was as if his mind had been erased of all history. She-Man looked down and found that he was wearing a pair of shorts, a t-shirt, and a pair of old comfortable leather sandals. He reached into his pocket, although he didn't know what that was. It just happened to be running his hands down the side of his body and felt something different. In his right pocket was a wad of folded paper with some type of fastener on it to keep the paper together. He thought, okay, I'll leave this in this area. Perhaps it might be useful. After sitting down and gathering his wits about him, he decided to strike off into the direction directly in front of him. Of course, he had no idea where he was going, but he certainly didn't want to sit in a spot all day. He noticed it was a little hot and he began to sweat. He started off having no directional instruments to rely on, only his own inner knowing, telling him which way to go. She-Man had no past memory. He had no prior programming or conditioning on his beliefs, needs, or wants. He had never been around another human that he remembered, so he was strictly going by his intuition. After walking for a while, he saw something next to a rock. She-Man thought it looked rather odd. It had a metal shell like a body, one wheel on the front, two wheels on the back, two handles on the back. You would call this a wheelbarrow, but She-Man had no label for it, since it had never been programmed into his awareness. However, his instincts were telling him to pick up each handle with his hands. He did this and saw that when he pushed the wheelbarrow forward, that the wheel turned and moved it forward as he moved forward. He thought, I'll take this along with me. Perhaps I might find other things that will be of interest and I can carry them in this. She-Man continued along his path. After a while, he saw in the far distance a shape rising out of the sand. As he approached, he saw something that looked like it had been made out of propped-up sticks or wood. He looked down at his feet and noticed that all along the structure there were hanging the same things that he had on his feet. As he got closer, he saw someone similar to himself standing behind this heap of sticks. He looked like a human up and down and noticed his shoes were very shiny. The man behind the counter looked over the She-Man's feet and said, "Need some new shoes there, don't you, sir?" The She-Man looked down at his feet and said, "I don't know, do I?" "Yes," the vendor said, looking into his empty wheelbarrow. The vendor said, "Looks to me like they're as old and out of style. You need about 5 pair." "Oh," said Sherman, and asked if he had a pair like the ones the vendor was wearing. "Well, of course I do, and I know just your size," the vendor alluded. The vendor came around the stand and brought 5 pair out for She-Man. She-Man took 1 pair of the sandals and put them on. He stood up and looked down. They were very handsome indeed with their shine. But he relayed to the vendor, "These sure are not as comfortable as the ones I had on." "Oh, they will be fine after a while. You just need to break them in. And you don't want someone else seeing you in those old worn-out sandals, do you?" She-Man put the rest of the sandals in the wheelbarrow. She-Man responded, "I hadn't thought about it." The vendor asked for payment, and She-Man looked puzzled. The vendor held up a dollar bill, and She-Man recognized it from the right pocket where he had found the folded money. Now She-Man knew this was money or some means of exchange. He handed the vendor his requested price and put his old sandals along with the new ones in the wheelbarrow and goes on. After a while, She-Man sees another stand. This one has food and drink. He stops and looks interestedly at what the vendor had. He selects several things, and the vendor tells him how much is required. She-Man pays the vendor his asking price and stops under the tree to sit down and eat and drink what he has purchased. Having no remembrance of food, this seemed to be an enjoyable experience. He went back for more and more. He just couldn't seem to get enough. The vendor happened to look down at his shoes and remarked at what a handsome set of sandals those were. She-Man smiled. She-Man, however, didn't show the vendor the blisters that the new sandals were rubbing on his feet. He thought to himself, perhaps I should put the old ones back on. He didn't do this. Then he remembered the comment of how nice they looked and the shoe vendor telling him how bad the old ones looked. He decided that he was tired of eating, even though the food and drink never seemed to quench the feeling of hunger and thirst. He continued walking for a distance and noticed another vendor. This vendor had shirts, and She-Man stopped to take a look. He looked at the vendor, and the vendor's shirts had shiny buttons and no wrinkles. The vendor looked at She-Man and told him, "You sure use some new shirts. The one you have on is ugly and doesn't suit you." She-Man looked down and noticed that the comment made him feel bad about himself. He replied, You think so, really? The vendor needed. You need at least 7 shirts if you have in your wheelbarrow is what you have in this world, the vendor remarked. This made Sheeman feel even worse. He looked in his wheelbarrow and there were just the old sandals and 4 pair of new shoes lying there. I guess you're right, remarked Sheeman. Give me 7 shirts. The vendor motioned for him to select what he wanted, but Sheeman shook his head. He was afraid at this point that what he thought appropriate would not be handsome, for he asked the vendor to select the shirts. Of course, the vendor selected the most expensive 7 shirts in his stand, smiled a mischievous smile as he took Sherman's money. Sheeman suddenly felt hungrier than he had before. He walked on down the path to find another food vendor. He stopped briefly to put on one of the new shirts, since he was now concerned that he wasn't dressed appropriately to walk on the path. He put his old T-shirt in the wheelbarrow, with the old sandals, new shoes, and the other new shirts. He noticed right away that the old shirt was scratchy and uncomfortable, but he put that out of his mind as the sandal rubbed another blister on his foot and his stomach growled louder than before. He stopped at another food stand and bought mounds of food. He took a selection under the tree and sat next to his wheelbarrow to eat the food. The food again tasted good, but did not relieve his hunger. He looked down at his feet and saw how badly the sandals were treating his feet, and he put his hand in the back of his shirt collar to try and find a moment's peace from the tag that was scratching the back of his neck. Oh well, he told himself, I need to look appropriate, don't I? The sandals were making it tougher and tougher to walk, so he decided the next tree that he came to he would lie down for a while and close his eyes to rest. Another vendor this time with a wheelbarrow himself filled with shorts awakened Sherman. The vendor stopped and told Sherman how bad his shorts looked. The vendor looked into Sherman's wheelbarrow and decided that Sherman needed at least 10 pairs of shorts, all different colors, to go with the 7 shirts. Sheeman once again withdrew into himself further with each passing comment that depicted some portion of his original clothing to be inappropriate. This made him feel so bad for these people who didn't know him all to tell him these negative things. This is just an awful place, Sheeman began thinking to himself. Once again, as the wheelbarrow was filled with more clothes and things, he became hungrier and hungrier. No amount of food seemed to make that hunger go away. Also now, each vendor was telling Sheeman that he'd better watch his wheelbarrow, or someone would steal his things from it. So each time that Sherman sat down, he drew his wheelbarrow closer and closer to him, so he would not have things stolen from his wheelbarrow. Sheeman put on a pair of new shorts. Again, they were not as comfortable as what his original had, but scratched his skin and didn't really fit right. This made Sheeman uncomfortable. He just didn't want others to think him inappropriately dressed. Their comments about his appearance were really making him very self-conscious. His wheelbarrow was now getting heavier and heavier and harder to push because of all the stuff that was piled in it. His feet were aching because of the new sandals. His skin was itching because of the shorts and shirt. He couldn't seem to get enough to eat and drink, and he just wanted to cry. At each stop, he guarded his wheelbarrow so that no one would steal from him, and at each stop and after each purchase, he became more miserable. The path was not flat anymore, but beginning to rise up in front of him. The wheelbarrow became harder and harder to push. At this point, his feet hurt so bad that he just sat down next to the road and began to cry. A vendor happened by and told him how nice his shoes looked, and Sheeman decided to try and walk a little further. He looked up into the sky for some reason. The sun was bearing down so much, but all of a sudden there seemed to be a slight breeze that brushed over his cheek. He thought he heard a whisper, but he shook his head and walked on. The road was becoming steeper now. He saw an old man along the path with no shoes and no shirt, and only wearing a ragged pair of shoes. The man looked frail and sad. Sheeman stopped in front of the man. For some reason, Sheeman felt another light breeze across his cheek and a whisper that he could barely hear that said, "Give." Sheeman shook his head again, but looked puzzled for a moment, then looked back at the old man next to the road. "Your feet are bare. Would you like a pair of my sandals?" Sheeman asked the old man. "Yes," the old man said, and Sheeman took a pair from the wheelbarrow, handed them to the old man. The old man thanked him profusely and hugged him. Sheeman noticed as he handed the sandals to the old man that he felt better. Sheeman also noticed that he became less hungry with his action. Interesting, he thought. I wonder why, he said to himself as he shook his head. He started back along the steep path. This time he saw a crying boy with nothing on, laying next to the road. When Sheeman stopped and asked what happened, the boy told him, sobbing, that someone stopped him and took all his fine clothes, left him for dead along the path. Hearing this, Sheeman was puzzled. He thought to himself, this is such a cruel place to be. The breeze came again and whispered very low, "Give." Sheeman looked down into his wheelbarrow and pulled out a shirt, shorts, a pair of sandals, handed them to the boy. The boy was so surprised for someone to do him a kindness, he hugged him and thanked him. The boy then did something that Sheeman had not seen anyone else do before. The boy looked up into the sky and said, "Thank you, Creator, for sending me help." Sheeman was confused, but again he felt a strange feeling of being less hungry and more at peace about himself. Next, he met an old woman on the path further up the hill. She, too, was completely naked, and Sheeman just shook his head and asked what horrible person had done this to her. She explained to Sheeman that she was robbed of all her clothing and worldly possessions. She told Sheeman that her belongings were in a wagon drawn by horses, and they were all taken, and she was left on the path for dead. Sheeman looked into his wheelbarrow and pulled out several pair of shorts and shirts, sandals, and handed them to the lady. She was so tremendously grateful and began crying because his kindness had touched her so deeply. Sheeman noticed almost instantly that he was really almost not hungry or thirsty at all now, and almost felt like he was glowing from the inside out. Sheeman was glad he was able to help out and looked down his wheelbarrow that was almost empty. He saw his old shirts, sandal, and decided to stop and put them back on. He had decided that since the other people had been robbed of their fine clothes, that he would rather be wearing something less than fine in other people's eyes. The clothes felt so much more comfortable, too. What a relief to have the fine ones off and the old ones back on. He began again. The clothes also seemed to have magic about them. They made him feel healed of the negative comments that had been received from all the vendors. He saw a ragged man sitting by the road. He stopped once again. He told the man that he would be glad to share what was left in his wheelbarrow if the man wanted him. He explained to the man that he had been wearing the clothes, but he was welcome to them if he liked. The man nodded and smiled, delighted to have something beside his one set of rags to cover his body. The old man took the last garments from the wheelbarrow and thanked him. Sheeman heard the whisper again, "Give." He looked down into the wheelbarrow and found it empty. He thought to himself, Give what? Sheeman offered the old man the wheelbarrow if he liked, and the old man accepted it with such enthusiasm. As Sheeman gave the last of his possessions away, the hunger and the thirst vanished. He turned to look after the old man with his wheelbarrow, and saw it transform into a white dove and fly into the heavens. He thought of the small naked boy, the old man, the old woman, and his gentleman. He looked into the heavens as he remembered the boy doing and feeling such an overwhelming rush of love, and yelled out to the skies, "Thank you, Creator." The feelings he had from this experience were so refreshing and replenishing. Sheeman felt as though he had eaten a full-course meal and been hugged by thousands of people all at once. He couldn't believe how this felt. He turned to look at this path that he was on and noticed that he was at the top of the mountain. He walked to the edge and noticed that there were 4 white doves gliding together, and as they fly by, he felt once again a breathe upon his cheek, and a whisper that said this time, "You are so very loved for who you are." He sat down on the ground and then lay in the grass beneath him, looking up into the sky. He just kept repeating to the heaven, "Thank you, Creator. Thank you, Creator. Thank you, Creator." He realized that he was no longer wanting, and that what he came with was the most appropriate thing for him. He also said that the Creator put him there to have this experience, so that he could learn that things are not what makes you happy. Giving is more important than others' opinion of really of value. It is how you feel about who you really are that counts. Beloveds, Sheeman was no different than you are. He came into this earth plane unprogrammed, if you will, and allowed himself to be molded by others' beliefs and comments. He allowed others to manipulate him because he knew no differently, and was afraid to follow his own inner guidance of what felt truly good because of fear of not being liked or approved of. Beautiful beings of light, he found himself starving for something that food and beverage would not satisfy because he didn't remember that giving, kindness, and love were the things that really nurtured his soul, not simply food or drink that would fill his human body. Sheeman also found that things were not as important as he remembered, that only what he truly came in with really all he needed, and it had been supplied by the Creator for his journey. Sheeman didn't need to buy a single thing, all was provided.